Welcome to Resilience Rising, the podcast that shatters poverty myths, sparks optimism, and fuels innovative change through community-inspired discussions. The title of today's episode is Growing Up or Giving Up, Interventions to Keep Hope Alive for Youth. I'm Amanda Fellows, Community Programs Manager at CFS Counseling and Wellbeing.
And I'm Brian Shelley, the Chief Executive and Philanthropy Officer at United Way Simcoe Muskoka.
On behalf of Brian and myself, I'm honored to acknowledge that we are currently recording on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. CFS Counseling and Wellbeing and United Way Simcoe Muskoka respect Indigenous history and culture and are dedicated to moving forward in the process of reconciliation with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people.
Today we are talking about a pandemic, not COVID-19, but a silent pandemic that started about 20 years ago and began escalating through the roof in 2020 when COVID hit our community. It is also life-threatening, and there is no vaccine. Youth mental health has been deteriorating across the globe at record rates, and unfortunately, our community is no exception. Those experiencing poverty are often among those that are getting hit the hardest. How bad is our youth mental health crisis, and what can we do about it? This is what we're talking about today on Resilience Rising. I'm pleased to share that today we are joined by Jessica Gourley and Dave Ward. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So before we begin, Jessica, we'll start with you. Maybe you could introduce yourself, where you work, and the scope of your current role.
Sure. So I'm Jessica Gourley. I'm a recreation programmer by trade with the City of Barrie with a long, extensive history of working with youth. Currently, I'm seconded onto an amazing grant, Bright Futures Barrie, where we're given the opportunity to help our community provide programming and opportunities for early intervention and prevention to looking for ways to keep them away from being parts of gun and gang violence.
Okay. And Dave?
Hi, thanks. My name is Dave Ward, and I work with CFS Counseling and Wellbeing in the Youth Call program. I'm a youth outreach coordinator. I've been in this position for about 2.5 years, and I've been working with youth directly for about 10 years.
Nice. That's awesome. Thanks to you both for being here. I think, like Brian mentioned in the beginning, youth issues facing youth today are more complex than they have ever been, especially in a post-COVID world. Can you speak to, you both are on the ground working with youth, have been on the ground working with youth. Can you speak to some of the most significant challenges that youth are facing today?
Sure. You gonna go?
Yeah, I mean, mental health is clearly the pandemic we're talking about. We're seeing a lot of anxiety post-COVID, so the transition back to an in-person world has been very difficult for a lot of the youth we work with. And, finding our way through that with kind of equitable and accessible technology, use of technology, using Zoom, using Discord, these different pieces, that's how we're kind of tackling that mental health piece for sure.
Yeah, I can echo a lot of what Dave is saying. We're finding that the youth are reentering into our programs, but they just don't have that understanding of how to be social because of the pandemic and being home and not having those resources available to them. Then there becomes the affordability piece of how do they go back to being able to afford, to participate in recreation or, families are having to make the choice of recreation or food, or do I pay for my house, or, does my kid play hockey? So we're really looking at, youth that are struggling with not only who they are as they transition through that transition age, but especially those that transition from grade 8 to grade 9 into grade 10, where they didn't have that social outlet to be in person. So we're seeing a lot of anxiety, we're seeing a lot of social anxiety, we're seeing a lot of undiagnosed individuals that are just looking for support but don't know where to go.
I think it's really interesting. And when we think about the pandemic, it seemed very long and never ending to us as adults. But if we think about a 10-year-old, 2 years is 20% of your life.
Yes.
Right? So if you're looking at a 10-year-old, they spent 20% of their life indoors in various states of lockdown. Yep. Main venue of communication, if they had it, was through a screen. It's really interesting and a little bit heartbreaking. So in your experience, what are some of the effective strategies to empower youth affected by poverty and overcoming barriers to reach their full potential? That's a lot there.
Yeah. That was a loaded question there, Brian.
I don't know if it was loaded, but it's a good question.
It's a great question.
Even if we walk it back to think about the intersection between mental health and poverty, right? So, you both do a lot different things for youth in different contexts in different ways. But when we think about, I know from my experience at Youth Call that poverty is a resounding issue for many of the youth coming through. So maybe speak to that piece too, around that intersection and what your experience has been like with that.
I find that the poverty level with youth, and you can jump in any time, is showing or presenting different than it did before. So it's not as evident that an individual or a young person is facing barriers to participation as it could have been before. We start to notice trends. We start to notice the way they engage. We start to notice that they keep asking for snacks, or we can't keep our snack cupboard full because it's always empty because they're looking for something to eat. We find it through the conversations that we have in regards to, I'm not sure if I go home tonight, will there be dinner? I'm not sure if their parent will be there. And then when we tied into the mental health part, it's that anxiety or that unknown of will I have this that can compete with this, but also, where do I get the support or the services to access that, right? So they're looking to individuals, the good and the bad, to try and find that next step, right? They want to belong. They want to feel that they're being seen. They want to be part of something. But they have this social anxiety of they don't know how to be part of it, right? And then there's that anxiety of how do I ask for help, right? How do I walk up to Dave and say, hey, Dave, not having a great day today. I really need this.
Right. And I think that's a good point, Jessica, because a lot of the youth we see, we come in and we say, we're going to talk about anxiety, we're going to talk about depression and some of these bigger pieces. And the beauty of Youth Call is that we also do system navigation where we can kind of work through some of those pieces behind the scenes, right? Because it's all tied back many times to poverty. So, when we're working with partners and we're working with unhoused youth, for example, we often are saying, hey, do you want to talk about your feelings? And it's, I'm surviving right now. That's my main goal right now, right? So in terms of housing and some of these pieces, right, that's where my mind goes, is like, what are your basic needs and how can we kind of work through that if that's the first step we need to take?
And talking about feelings is hard. It's hard as an adult. It's hard as a youth. Like to say, hey, can you tell me how you're feeling today? Yeah. It makes it difficult. And when you're working in recreation, for us, we don't have that service navigation. So the service navigation to us is working with our partners. So we look to the community to see what can you offer, or how can we work together to offer the additional supports that we need. Like working in partnership with you, through some of the programs that we're doing, we can provide the recreation and you've got the mental health. It's like a happy sort of synergy that happens there, that a youth can see that full wraparound service, right? And that makes it easier. It's one less door for them to have to knock on or open, right?
Right. Comes back to Brian's original question around, effective strategies around how we empower youth. And a part of that, I think, is collective action, right? So I like that word, collective action, from some of the other episodes that we've recorded, but, working together, leveraging, existing supports within the social service sector in order to engage youth in an effective way and support them more holistically.
Well, if we build on another thing that Dave said too, it's also about addressing the most pressing need first, right? So before we can deal with, we're talking about strategies, before we can deal with mental health, what I'm hearing Dave say is like, I've got someone who's in survival mode and they need to know they have a safe place to sleep tonight. They need to know they have food that's going to be filling their belly. They need to know that they're going to be clothed tomorrow, right? And so we can't always deal with the mental health issue until we've, it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We need to deal with those most pressing needs. And so, full disclosure, my wife is a child psychologist. She's busier than ever coming out of the pandemic, and she is serving primarily children and youth from socially economic, mobile, upper middle class families, right? So it's a real privilege to be able to address mental health in that way, right? I think what Dave's saying and what I'm hearing Jess saying as well is that for kids that are experiencing poverty, the family doesn't have the bandwidth necessarily to address that issue. And that creates this whole other spiral effect, right? And it's the same with, if I think of our schools only have so much capacity to, we hear that, it's only, 2 or 3 kids that are getting the supports that they need. Well, kids are falling through the cracks. If you're living in a middle class family, you can access service or support through a private therapist or private support. But if you're worried about putting food on the table, how many of these kids are not getting the supports that they need? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's where, sorry, hit something there. Go back to the, Dave's answer that I think was really crucial is that, before we start delving into feelings and start delving into, terms like anxiety or depression, it's that we need to make sure that these kids, these human beings are getting their needs met.
Right. And what role they play in the family is another piece too, yes. Right? So we have a lot of folks who come to Youth Call and say, I'm cooking dinner every night this week. I'm babysitting my younger siblings this week. I'm doing this, and this. And it goes back to that survival piece, right? So how do we manage that when, mental health is an obvious piece with that, but these folks are doing the job that adults do as well, and also going to school and also going to rec programs. And that's a lot. That's a lot of pressure to have all of that and feel the need to kind of hold that all together as a young person and think, who cares for the carer when the young person is the carer in the family and they've been put in that position, right?
And we find that they'll come to recreation and they'll also have their siblings with them, but then it limits what they can access because some spaces are identified as certain age groups, right? And that's just for the safety and of those that are involved. So, if you're coming with your younger siblings and you're looking to access a space, you can't always access it because there isn't something for them to do. And I also think that there's still, one of the biggest things that I found recently, working on this grant is that as we've come out of COVID and as, us as organizations are finding themselves coming out of COVID, we're finally taking that environmental scan of what's happening in our community, what's available in our community. I don't need to reinvent the wheel because Dave's organization's got this under control, but I can work with them to tweak the programs that I'm doing. So I'm starting to see that, collaborative approach start to happen in the community as we build upon the resources that are there to sort of build that wraparound for the youth so that we have the tools to be able to say, or my staff can be able to say, hey, Jess, we've got this individual, they're looking for housing. Perfect. Here's a contact at Youth Haven. Let's see if we can make that phone call for them. We can assist in that way. But we also find in rec, if we don't feed them, there's no recreation, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same in school. If they don't have breakfast, they don't successfully make it through the day at school. It's the same in rec. By the time they hit our door, no different than my kids, it's I'm hungry and I need food and I need food now, right? So, I would say like 90, a significant part of our budget goes to accessing food. And recently I had a conversation with the food bank and they said that the level of salaries of individuals that are asking for assistance is no longer just lower income. Right. Because even middle class can't afford some of the necessities that are needed now too, right?
Yeah, I'm just pulling up a sheet that we recorded another episode talking about, food insecurity.
Yes.
And it was interesting to see that a family of 4 needs $1,225.74 to eat well a month, which is really high, or $445.95 a person. Mm-hmm. So if you have a relatively large family, that is a lot of money a month, even even for people who make a decent income to be able to afford that.
Yeah.
And so you think about then the barriers that youth face, especially when they're from, a different socioeconomic status or they're living in poverty. What does that look like? And then also, the intersections of socioeconomic status, like with other marginalized groups, like people of different abilities or people of different genders or racialized groups. What do you see, or what does that look like for you when we think about those intersections and the experience of those youth? Is it unique? Mm-hmm. Are those youth having a unique experience too?
Yeah, it's real. The statistics aren't lying. It's real. Yeah. So we see folks coming in from all walks of life at Youth Call, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think it's worth mentioning that, we talk about how these things intersect with poverty, but these people are also human beings, and they come from beautiful backgrounds with wonderful strengths and abilities that maybe we don't see in the social services the way we should recognize them. But we see them and we come to places like Uplift Black, and we, you know, bring in partners who know what they're talking about. We do the trainings we need to do to serve these young people, right? Because their needs are unique. Every youth that comes through both of our doors, I would imagine, are completely unique and needed to be treated as so, right? So for us at Youth Call, whatever that looks like, the client is in the driver's seat, and we're just in the passenger seat with them, kind of, you know, chatting with them as we go down the road, the metaphorical road, because they're the expert on their scenario and their life and their social location, and that's not something that we can define for them.
So let's build on that. Can you give us some examples of successful youth-focused programs or initiatives that address the multifaceted impacts of poverty on young people? So examples of, you know, innovative programs that you've seen some of your partners delivering that are meeting youth where they are, and specifically kind of breaking down some of those barriers for youth experiencing poverty.
Yeah, I think I'm in a unique position right now with the Bright Futures Barrie, being able to share some of I'll share the programs. I won't necessarily share the organizations that they're affiliated with, just to give us some time there. But you know, there's a unique one in partnership, and they're rebuilding motorcycles. So they're introducing individuals to post-secondary school. They're having a motorcycle there that they're going to have a mechanic and a trades, and they're going to rebuild the motorcycle. And then to support the program, they're then going to do poker runs with motorcycles. You know, we have another unique partnership where they're rebuilding pedal bikes, and at the end of them, every individual who participates in it will get a free bike. Right? That's a mode of transportation, right? That's active transportation. That's going to get them around the community and accessing it. We have a few that are incorporating music. And I know, Dave, in your Spotify list at Allendale is a great way to engage anybody in a conversation or a topic. And so we have those that are looking at introducing it to go hand in hand with mental health. So and psychosis, and looking at working with them with music. And then we also have those that are looking to teach a teachable skill. So they're going to learn to play a guitar or a ukulele, which is then, you know, something that they can take with them and do something different in their environment.
You also have one that's providing support for applications to post-secondary education, which I think is really great. And I think what's unique about the Brighter Futures Barrie grant is that the services that are being funded through there are really funded across the spectrum from prevention to intervention. And many of them really foster a sense of belonging, right? So when we think about poverty, there's pieces around meeting basic needs, there's challenges with addressing mental health issues, but I think there's also this core piece of people needing a place to fit, right? When I listen to you talk about the unique experience of every youth, people need that sense of belonging. They need community, right? When we talk about, I wonder, I don't know if I've said this before on another episode, but when we look at even just Getting Ahead as an innovative model, Muskoka does that program, Getting Ahead Bridges Out of Poverty, really well, but they use the definition of poverty as the extent to which a person does without resources. And then they talk about resources and highlight that social capital and having connections and community is one of the, actually, more than financial, is actually one of the most valuable resources people in poverty can have. And when you think about youth who have been isolated, youth who are struggling to fit, to find community, right? The programs you're talking about help to foster that community connection and belonging, which I think is really important.
And I think it goes hand in hand with when we look at risk. So, right, when you're looking at the grant and it's at risk, everybody's at risk of something. At risk of belonging, at risk of being seen, at risk of
what does
poverty.
At risk mean?
I don't even know if there's a true definition of at risk anymore, because when we're looking at this great funding that we have, it's for individuals that are at risk. Well, there's a part of every individual that is at risk, or that needs that skill development, that counseling, that mental health. Like, when we did a community scan and did a survey, both organizations and community members identified mental health as being one of the top 5 needs in our community that aren't being met. So there's just not enough mental health providers, or if there is, they just don't know where to go. They don't know where to look. They don't know where to access it.
Or if they do, they can't afford them.
They can't afford them, right? And so then there's that sliding scale. And then people talk about, as well as, is the service that I can get for free as good as the service that I could get if I paid for it? Right. So then there's that misconception of just because it's free, means it's not necessarily as good. Well, I can attest for our programs, they're free and they're pretty awesome. So there are amazing services that are out there that are free because we have that ability. The walk-in clinics that your organization offers, and that's back is phenomenal because it's a great resource for us to be able to say, here, let's book you an appointment. Let's get you in to get to go see somebody because it's not my area of expertise, but I can make that phone call for you, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important to know, I'm just stepping on Dave's territory, but Dave also works our walk-in counseling clinic every Wednesday now. So if youth are looking to get access to free mental health support, then Dave is there providing that support. Shout out to United Way who helped us launch those all those years ago. But awesome. It's a great, low barrier, same day access, totally qualified human being providing support for mental health, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think, Jessica, you touched on something really wonderful around kind of needs assessments, right? Mm-hmm. So for a long time, I think we had people at the top saying, we know what's best for people living in poverty. We know what's best for people experiencing mental health. And now we're engaging the youth, we're engaging their families in ways that I don't think we were doing a decade, 2 decades ago. So that's a really big piece for me, seeing that the stuff we're providing these youth is driven by their voices. Yes. We have a youth advisory council at Youth Call that's kind of steering where we're going and what we need to do. And that's the way to do it, right? Communities need a voice in their communities, So we have, a need for, it's semi-formal season. It's going to be prom season. So we have the youth center in Aurelia providing, formal clothes to young people. And the smiles that I saw just looking at the pictures of those and, all of those pieces, that was a need that was seen throughout COVID and it was filled. So that's what I think is wonderful for sure.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I think what you're touching on here, what I like what both of you are saying is that mental health is beyond just therapy, right? I think it's about feeling included, right? It's about belonging in your community. And I think that both of you with the programs that you're supporting, with the programs that you're delivering, are doing such a huge job in creating an inclusive community of belonging, which we all strive for, but we probably never strive for it more than we do in our teenage years. Yeah. And when you have someone who's experiencing poverty, it's exacerbated that much more, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we also talk about the pandemic was of medical, but there was really a pandemic of society as well that went hand in hand. And as we come out of that and as we're looking for resources and as we're looking to rebuild, we're rebuilding based on what the needs are now, right? Mm-hmm. Doing that needs assessment and having those individuals engaged. Mm-hmm. The City of Barrie recently is about to launch their youth committee of council, and that's something that's new that hasn't existed before, which is amazing that we're engaging, these individuals that will have feedback on some of the processes and works that are happening within the City of Barrie. But then we also look to engage with the other youth groups that are out there to get their feedback and to see what it is that we're asking. The youth that are coming through the door and say one day, hey, we want to play Uno. Well, the next day there's a deck of Uno cards sitting on the desk. Let's have a game, right? Because it is solely driven by them. And if it's not, it doesn't work. The theory of if you build it, they will come doesn't exist. It's they will build it, they will come, right? So involve the individuals in the process and the engagement and the building of the programs, then they're the ones that are going to steer and they're going to drive it and they're going to come out. I was recently at a conference and one of the things that stood out to me was that sense of belonging, but that sense of being seen. And it only takes one person to see one person, right? So when we talk about being seen, it could be a teacher, it could be Dave, it could be Brian at the ski hill. It could be Amanda with the You Call van, or it could be one of my staff in the youth center that are connecting with that individual that makes them feel seen, and that makes their day just that little bit more. That somebody cares and someone's paying attention. Because a lot of us can go through the day without ever feeling like we've been seen. But that sense of being seen ties into the sense of belonging, which ties into that sense of community, that I matter and that I'm part of something.
Yeah.
I think that's completely right. For us at Youth Call, that looks different based on all of our different programming.
For sure.
Right? So I think about our Discord server, which is an online space for youth 14 to 19. And in that space, every week we have a voice call. So, you can turn your video on, you can keep it off. It's up to you. And we do a little check-in. How was your day? How was your week? But I always bring it back to, what do we want to do here, right? So this is your time, not mine. I'm just here to kind of facilitate our conversations. And so we had the idea as a group that we would have some guided talks around things like social media and mental health, and just kind of open these conversations and hear their perspective, right? And we also do our Talk Back to Negativity series, where we go into schools and we talk about things, again, like social media. And the people we're presenting to are the experts, not us, not me and my coworkers. It's them, right?
They're the experts.
So usually we come away with more insight from the programming.
Aha moments, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the best is when you're having to engage and have that back and forth, where they really break down that barrier and talk to you. Yeah, love that.
If you could leave our listeners with just one thing, what would it be? Especially, if this podcast primarily is about supporting folks living in poverty and breaking down some of the stigma related to poverty. This episode's about youth mental health. So when we think about intersection there between poverty and youth mental health, what's the one thing you would want friends, neighbors, coworkers to realize about the experience of those in our community?
Youth poverty is in your community. It's in my community. It's everywhere, whether we see it or not. And for the young folks who might be listening, intergenerational poverty is a thing, but there are ways that we can kind of fill in the gaps, and it starts with a call, it starts with a conversation, and that's how we get this conversation moving, right? And a lot of folks that come through youth calls say, you know what, I was in my life given a broken compass. I don't know which way to go. I was not taught which way to go or how to get out of this cycle. And we might be a small tool or a small piece of that puzzle. The puzzle is obviously much larger than Youth Call or Rec Berry. Yep. But if we can be a small piece for you, we want to be there for you in Simcoe County.
And I agree. I think that, Dave said a lot of the great things, so I'm just going to echo what you said, but it's that feeling of don't be afraid to ask for help. Doesn't matter what the age is or who you are or what you're looking for, ask for help, because that one person can reach out to another person in the community who may know somebody, that whole don't judge a book by a cover. Everybody's dealing with something, watch, have some empathy, take that moment to be that active listener that may be that all they need that day, but you may take something away from that you can then implement or provide or find that resource for. So don't be afraid to ask for help.
Jessica and Dave, thank you so much for joining us today. Today on Resilience Rising, we were joined by Jessica Gourley from the City of Barrie and Dave Ward from CFS Counseling Wellbeing. Their information will be on our podcast pages along with further resources. I would also like to thank our studio partners at Uplift Black Center for Social Justice and Inclusion. We recorded today's podcast at their Upbeat Box Creative Studio in downtown Barrie. And finally, thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in. If you liked this episode, please subscribe and like us on social media to let others know about Resilience Rising, the podcast that shatters poverty myths, sparks optimism, and fuels innovative change through community-inspired discussion. You can share the podcast using the hashtag Resilience Rising.
And we'll see you next time on episode 6, which will be dropping soon, when we discuss dignity in dining, ingredients for creating food security. I'm Amanda Fellows of CFS Counseling and Wellbeing, and this is my co-host,
Ryan Shelley from United Way Simcoe Muskoka,
asking you to embrace innovative change to ensure our communities are great places to live for everyone. Thanks.
Thanks so much.